Hi, everyone. My name is Mira, and I'm an editorial and audience assistant for My Jewish Learning. We did originally plan to host this talk as part of commemorating Pride Month, but it was postponed. However, Pride Month doesn't just happen in June, and different municipalities and countries and states and cities around the country and the world have their own Pride Months. For me, as a resident of Richmond, Pride Month is actually coming up in September. So always relevant, always fun. Feel free to share where you're tuning in from in the chat. You can share any questions that come up for you over the course of this conversation. And we welcome this welcome to this author interview with David Adjmi. Adjmi is an American playwright and author born and raised in New York Syrian Jewish community. And in his book, as he navigates his gay identity along with a tumultuous upbringing and the struggles of every day, he finds his place and himself in theater and writing. He joins us today to talk about his 2020 memoir, Lot 6. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm going to start out with our first question. For those who may not have read the book but are tuning in, can you share a bit about the title?
The title, well, yes, Lot 6 is a sort of pejorative term that's also a kind of Syrian Sephardic slang that I grew up with. This was back in the 80s. I don't know if people still use it. But basically, it's kind of an arcane, it's a hard thing to describe. Syrian Jews a lot of Syrian Jews owned shops, like retail shops, camera shops, electronic shops. And they would often be a little bit unorthodox, shall we say, in pricing. So they wouldn't always have the prices listed on, let's say, a camera. They would have a bunch of numbers that would be meaningless to everyone but them. And the numbers would be called lot numbers. And encoded in the lot numbers was the wholesale price of the thing. So they knew, okay, if this wholesales for $12, I can maybe sell it to these tourists for $300 or $400. I'll see how much I can jack it up. But the lot numbers doubled the original price. So lot 6 is actually code for 3, which is an odd number, odd as in queer. And so that was the slang. I know it's a crazy roundabout way of getting to this, but that was the slang for queer people. And my book is not necessarily about being gay. I mean, that's part of it because that's part of my identity, but it's not actually, it's more about a kind of cultural queerness, or it's about how one does not necessarily feel so easily assimilable into the world that they're brought into, and what to do with that problem. So that's why I use that as my title.
We can definitely touch on the idea of cultural queerness here because Adjmi comes from the Arabic word ajam, which is used to just be for Persians, but broadly refers to someone who is mute, as in someone who can't speak Arabic. And a pretty big facet of this book is that you've included a ton of Syrian slang. You've included Judeo-Arabic slang. And in this memoir, you're also talking about having a sense that your ancestors came from multiple places before ending up in Syria. So I'm curious about how existing outside of those easily definable national identities informs your concerns about maybe in references in your work and why, what motivated you to include so much of that?
You mean in terms of the sort of the kind of hybrid sense of my antecedents?
Yes.
Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's so funny. I'm writing a play about tragedy, and Oedipus is one of the intertexts of that play. And I'm reading a book by Terry Eagleton, the great philosopher and writer, and he was talking about how Oedipus is so much like the Sphinx, and how the Sphinx has this hybrid identity, but so does Oedipus, because Oedipus, being like, he doesn't quite know who he is. He's both an enigma to himself. He doesn't understand his own circumstances, but he also solves riddles, and there's all these paradoxical elements to his identity. And I don't know why I bring that up, but I was thinking like when you asked the question, there is something about not quite understanding because I'm a Syrian Sephardic Jew, so we're Spanish, we're European Spanish Jews, but we also are Middle Eastern Jews. But then we're also Brooklynites. And that's a whole other thing, because being from Brooklyn, especially when I grew up in the 70s and 80s, it was like a very intense part of my identity. If you watch Saturday Night Fever, or like one of these or like, Working Girl, the Melanie Griffith character. Like, I remember seeing Working Girl in the 80s at this theater in Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn, and everyone it was like the whole movie was an inside joke for Brooklynites. And so anyways, I've always felt like I've had this kind of strangely, like, I don't know, I didn't quite know what to do with these different parts of my identity. I could see them, people could talk about them to me and tell me things like, okay, you're a Sephardic Jew. But my parents they weren't very bound to tradition, or it wasn't a family where I was told stories about these things, and that the stories like helped inform my sense of identity. So these different hybrid aspects of my lineage just kind of floated around. It was almost like, babies have those floating, what are they called? Mobiles. That's what it was like. I was like looking at this stuff going, okay, I think that's who I am, but I can't attach to any of this stuff. And so I think because I couldn't attach to it, because there were no sort of big master narratives in my family, and people didn't have very like deep conversations about heritage and where you're from, that made me go, oh my God, yes, like this feels really, I feel rooted in something. I'm part of something. I never felt that. So what I had to do was sort of find myself elsewhere. And that's when I started going to, I didn't start, but I'd always been watching films and reading books and going to the theater and stuff like that. And so that's really where I felt myself come to life, or listening to music. That's where I felt connected to the world in some way.
Yeah, about the idea of family narratives, in a lot of typical Jewish family origin stories, a Jewish family immigrates, they come from nothing, they wind up becoming successful and middle class when they come to America. And in your story, this tale is inverted. I'd kind of love to know more about how class informs Lot 6 and about how it informs other work that you may be doing.
It's really complicated. A really complicated question. It's, here is the master narrative of my family. My family, I was basically born much later than my brothers and sisters. I was a mistake, right? My brother, who's closest in age to me, so I have two brothers and one sister, and the brother who's closest in age to me is 12 years older, I think, than I am. And my family, my mother and my father were from Brooklyn, but at some point early on in their marriage, my dad got this opportunity to go into business in Nashville, Tennessee, in this, I guess, the 60s or 70s. And he opened up like kind of like a Kmart, a proto Kmart in Nashville. And he made tons of money. And they just got really rich, and they had this idyllic life. It was like Eden. Those were the stories I heard. Wow, Nashville, it was so great. The Grand Ole Opry, yeah, the honky tonks or whatever they did. And then, they became nubile. And my parents said, okay, they can't marry someone from Nashville because they're not Jewish, so we have to get out of here. And they sort of lived a double life in Nashville, where they ate cheeseburgers, but they were still Jews. But then, at some point, my dad just said, no, we have to toe the line. They moved to Brooklyn, and my dad started another business, and his brother said, you really need to open a store in Fort Apache, the Bronx, because it's the hot new area, and you're going to make a mint. And of course, Fort Apache, the Bronx, turned out to be the most crime infested area in all the world. And it became like there were movies made about it and it was all over the news. My father, like they broke into his store so many times and he just insisted on, keeping it going. And eventually he lost the ability to get it insured because it had been broken in so many times, but he wouldn't give it up. And eventually they just stole everything. They just stole everything from him. So he had absolutely nothing. So then my siblings were conscripted to go to work. And then I was born into that. So, I was born into this sort of, and also the Syrian Jewish Sephardic community that I'm from, it's highly, highly status conscious, very, very money conscious, and very stratified based on how much money you have. And it's very, and also these are very attractive people. They're not ugly. They're very good looking. They know how to dress. It's a kind of it's like the sexy version of Judaism. Do you know what I mean? Like it was a very kind of like, wow, that's so sexy. And we couldn't fully participate in that because we didn't have the means to do it. Do you know what I mean? And so we were sort of like, we weren't completely off the grid. We had some kind of status, and the name Adjmi, there's a lot of very wealthy Adjmi. So we had a kind of status by virtue of the fact that we had this name. But we were in the fringes for sure. And so I grew up with like this deep desire to have a ton of money. Of course, I have no facility for making money at all. I had to learn that later in life. I'm really just an artist. But I just wanted glamour, and to me, the money felt like a kind of magic and transcendence. I mean, it's Karl Marx, right? Like there's something so magical about the ability of what money can do for someone, how something can happen as if by magic. And so for me, it was about art and culture, and then it was about money and glamour. And these were all kind of part of one nimbus of things in my head. And it was all about transformation. How can I transform myself? How can I transcend my life? So that's sort of so it's very complicated for me, the stuff about money and class growing up.
I think that really relates to themes of soul searching in your book. You actually end the book with the line, "Is that me?" And something that I'm curious about is, was it uncomfortable to become the main character of your own story? Did it have an impact on your understanding of your own agency? And by writing this book, did you uncover a continuity of self or a discontinuity of self?
Well, definitely both. There was a continuity that I had to find by constructing a linear. I mean, life isn't linear. Life is just kind of hodgepodge. Life doesn't have a narrative. Memoirs impose narrative on this kind of anarchy in life and to give it a kind of coherence. But the coherence isn't necessarily there. But sometimes, sometimes writing the linear narrative, I go, well, that led to that, sort of. I mean, there's many, many things that led to many things, but that thing did sort of lead to this. But what led to that? And I couldn't figure it out. Like, why did I do that? Why was that the consequence of and I realized I was missing something. And I had to investigate the missing thing. And often it was something I didn't want to look at. And that was buried. And that was interesting about writing a memoir, because I was forced to encounter things that I had buried that I didn't remember burying, because I didn't want to look at it, or I didn't want to feel badly about myself. And so, but I was pretty rigorous about, I took it very seriously. I probably won't write another memoir ever again. And I was asked to write this book by these people at HarperCollins once a play of mine came out. So I don't write long form prose. I'd never done it before. I had to teach myself how to do it, but I thought, I'm going to do a really good one, because I want it to be, if this is the only one I write, I want it to be good. And then it's going to be there forever on bookshelves. So it's like, I wanted it to be good. So I took the project of seeing myself as a main character very, very seriously, and trying to figure out how to be both subject and object. Like, how do you have that kind of binocular vision? So, I usually write plays. That's how I my training, and that's what I usually do. So I don't have to think about myself when I'm writing a play, even though I always seep into my characters in my plays, but it's not as deliberate as when you're writing a memoir. You have to sort of, it has to be about you, but at the same time, what does it mean to be about you? You have to invent a character. You have to create a persona that can fit in 300 pages. You know what I mean? And like, it's almost like a poet. It's like more like poetry. You're finding a way to compress yourself so that you can make, you can seem somewhat coherent, or even the incoherent parts of yourself can seem coherent in this format of a memoir. It was very, very challenging.
I can only imagine. And in your book, you actually talk about a teacher, Gloria, who has a really somewhat negative impact on you. And a line that really stood out to me is that you talk about losing yourself to her tastes. So losing yourself to her expectations. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for people out there who are going through the same thing, who are, whether they're artists or whether they're opening their own stores. What helped get you out of that place? What helped you find yourself again?
Well, what you're referencing is a section very late in the book where I get into Juilliard, into this very, very prestigious playwriting program. They only take like 1 or 2 people a year, and there are 2 professors, one of whom is incredibly hard on me, and it almost becomes a kind of sadism. It's like the movie Whiplash. It was a little bit like that. It was very, very, very dark. And I had not a lot of confidence as a writer because I didn't come from a family of writers. I wasn't really reared to be a writer or an artist. No one in my family had done that. So I felt a little rogue. But I had gone to another writing program at the University of Iowa just before this, and they liked me. And I thought, okay, maybe I'm good. Okay, maybe I could do this. And then I came to this, in the middle of New York City at Lincoln Center, taking classes with this very fancy Pulitzer Prize winning playwright who thought I was atrocious. She couldn't have hated me more. And she did tap into my own feelings about myself. I mean, it wasn't just she didn't like me, because, okay, someone could not like you or think you're a bad writer, and then you just go, all right, But I think deep down, she tapped into my own self-loathing, my own insecurities, the stuff that I didn't resolve from my childhood with my parents and all this stuff, because I didn't get a ton of support from my family. And so it was like she like sort of pulled at this thread, and then the whole thing just fell apart. You know what I mean? It's like there's a Hitchcock movie like that, where someone pulls at a thread of a sweater and the whole sweater comes apart. And the sweater did come apart. And I guess for me, what did I do to overcome it? I feel like it took me a while. I was blocked. I couldn't write. I stopped writing. I thought I was going to quit, really, writing for a couple of years, actually. And then there was sort of like this part of me, and I guess it's my will or my drive or my pride or my higher self or whatever. It was like, no, you can't. And so what I ended up doing was just, I focused on her. I just focused on what was happening instead of trying to run away from it and write something else. I just thought I need to explore and interrogate what has happened to me. And so I'm going to now magnify it, and I'm going to make it the subject of my new plays. And I'm going to think about it in terms of the fractal pattern that I'm seeing in the world and in politics, and I started making these plays that are all about pedagogy, and it's all about people teaching people things, but destroying them through the teaching. And I was seeing it a lot in the world. And I was like, why are people doing this? So I just wanted to interrogate it. And so I did. And those became my first plays that got produced. One of those plays, called The Evildoers, got done at Yale Rep. That was my first big play. My other play, Stunning, got done at Lincoln Center. And so that was like the beginning of my career. So I guess it was sort of like, rather than try to run from the aversion try to like, this made me feel bad. This makes me feel terrible. I don't want to look at it. I did the exact opposite. I magnified it. I focused on it, and I said, I want to like confront this head on and look at it without falling apart. That's so it actually became a gift.
I really appreciate that. I'm also wondering about the response to your book from the different communities you find yourself a part of. Close to the end of Lot 6, you mentioned feedback from LGBTQ Syrian Jews after the debut of your first play, Stunning, which is about a lesbian romance between a Syrian Jewish woman and her Black housekeeper, and explores themes of homophobia and anti-Blackness. So you wrote, for some Syrians, particularly those who were out of the community, I was a minor celebrity. They left notes for me at the theater, closeted Syrians who wanted to be writers, who were artists and like me decided to reinvent themselves. What I'm curious about is whether you received unexpected responses to the book from people who might share one thing in common with you, but not others. Syrians who aren't Jewish, Jews who aren't Syrian, LGBTQ people who were one or neither. And I'm wondering about whether that opened kind of new relationships for you with people who you may have shared one thing with, but not others.
You know, I'm pretty open in terms of my friend groups and just in terms of how the circles I move in. Like, it's pretty wide in terms of who I meet up with. And so, and I guess, I mean, like I said with this book, like I don't really fit in. I still don't fit in anywhere. I have I'm sort of have my own niche. It's mine. But people, what was the most moving thing about the reception to this book? It got people really, I got a lot of very, very, very intense, wonderful letters from people who found me, I don't know, on my website or whatever. And I just think that this book, the book is very sincere, and I think it just it transmits. And so people really are able to receive it. And I think people struggling with identity or struggling with their families have had very powerful reactions to the book. So that's so meaningful to me because it really is nakedly me. You know what I mean? It's like if people rejected my story, I'd feel so bad, or, you know, so that was really nice. But the thing that was so incredible was we did one Zoom reading, because the book came out during COVID. So it was a Zoom reading on for queer Arabic Jews. And something like maybe 20 or 30 people showed up to that. And they were so supportive. And it was so moving to me because I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is actually my demographic. But like, I never knew any of these people before. I never met, like growing up, I never knew anyone who was an out Jewish, you know, Syrian Jew. So the fact that I had like their support, and when I told them I thought that the name of the book was really punk rock, but that no one would really understand it except for like 6 people, they all kind of did like little, you know, celebratory gestures on the Zoom, and I thought it was really adorable. Anyway, that was really, really sweet.
That sounds like a really healing experience. I think
It was.
I'll wait until the end to pause the recording to share how I first came across Lot 6, because we do have someone in the audience who's really special to me, who's here tonight. So about community and about parenthood, I guess therapy, you kind of talk with both of your parents toward the end of the book about the complexities of your childhood and the ways you were hurt growing up. I'm wondering if you've learned anything from this and what you would say to people struggling to tell their own stories, especially ones that could put them in positions of precarity or get them cut off from community support. So talking about being queer, issues of class, family dysfunction, and trauma.
Yeah, it's really, you know, I just taught at a writing conference in Tennessee called the Sewanee Writers Conference. And one of my colleagues is this guy named Dan O'Brien, and he wrote a memoir, Dan did, about his family, and they cut him off. They disowned him. It's a very real thing. It's a very real possibility. And I think sometimes people don't understand that writers, sometimes writing is all we have. And that if, and we also have, we're people who generally have to tell the truth as best as we can. And, and it's not, I know very few writers who really set out to hurt people. If anything, most writers are just anxious that their truth is going to wound someone. So the way that I dealt with it was I tried to write in a very I looked at like writing other characters, like people in my family who became characters in this book. I looked at them as like drawing a still life. So I would go into my memory and I try to remember every detail about what happened, and I wouldn't put value judgments on what they said or did. And if they did something nice, I would put that in. And I would just draw it, and I try to be as exact as possible. So for me, the exactitude of the rendering replaced like moral judgments, because I just thought I'm just gonna just try to get as close to what how render it as specifically as possible. And the book is very, very granular. It gets into a lot of detail sometimes, but I think that was the only way I knew how to write this book. So that's what I sort of tell people. Ask me a lot. Like I just got an email tonight from a student of mine saying how should I do this if I want to write a memoir? I don't want my family to hate me. And but I think that if you're asking me that question, there's something toxic in your family dynamic that you're probably on a soul level trying to uproot and bring to light. And so, and that's why writers exist sometimes. Like we need to sort of take dysfunctional things and bring them to light so that we can heal them. And a lot of times people resist that, people who are the subjects of it. And I totally understand it, because it's horrible to suddenly open a book and there you are and you're not being praised. Like you're not, the book is not saying, oh, what a wonderful mother I had. And oh, she was so great and she cooked me these big ziti and I loved it. It's not always about that. It doesn't mean that you can't feel love for your mother. Sometimes you don't put things in the book that you feel because it's not germane to the story. It's not really about that. And so I've looked at my like renderings of myself in other people's books and thought like, oh, you don't love me, but they do love you, but they're not going to put all of that in this particular book. Like they're going to write what's germane to the story of this book, and you're going to be instrumentalized as a character to reveal something about the story. And so, but I know it's hard for people. My mother had a very, 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 she's still mad at me. I don't think she'll ever not be mad at me because she's such a big character in the book. But there are people who love my mother. They're like, oh my God, what a great character. Right. But then there are other people who are like, oh my God, your mother's a monster. It's really split. And my mother she's such a private person. She doesn't like to be exposed. And of course, the writer in me is like, I have to expose this. I don't like, I don't like feeling like I have to hide. Like I was taught my whole life, you have to hide who you are, lower the shades. I don't want people looking in the house. That was my mother my whole life. So I was like, I need to open these shades and I need to like let some sunlight in. And we have to I want to be able to feel the freedom, at least in my mind, to explore my own story. And so, we'll never fully see eye to eye on the ethics of me writing about her. And even though I completely understand why she doesn't like it, but I still feel sort of strongly that I had to do what I did. It's complicated, like everything.
I think that this isn't really a question, but I actually think you really treated a lot of the women in your story with a lot of tenderness. Within my own family, there's a lot of dismissal, especially of women who are maybe from immigrant backgrounds or first or second generation in the US, as being histrionic and hysterical. And it's really intense. And so honestly, I thought your portrayal of your mother and of your sister and of the women in your community were really loving. I related to them. They reminded me of women in my own life. I know that's probably not of serious comfort to your mom, but I hope that she knows that there are definitely women out there who see themselves in her. and also appreciate how loving you are when you talk about her and think to themselves, oh my God, well, if I have a kid someday and maybe some things happen, like they'll totally take me to task, but they'll still love me.
Yeah.
Oh no, that really shone through for me. I can't speak to other people, but when you're talking about uprooting something and bringing it to light, I think that you're also talking about a process of replanting. And so I'm wondering whether you came to see any of the people in your life in a new light over the course of writing the book. Did the memoir change your relationships with people in your life? Did siblings, did you see anyone in your life kind of take what you had written about them, and maybe did it, like Gloria, inspire them or become a catalyst for them to change in any way?
Well, yes. So I don't know if I can talk about all of it because there was a lot of stuff that happened after the book came out. Um, I had my friend in the book who I call Howie, who I grew up with from when he was like a brother to me, and he was also gay and in the closet, and we were really close friends. We were sort of had a falling out, about 10 years ago. And right as the book was coming out, I sent it to him. And he's a huge character in the book. And I said, listen, I need you to sign off on this because I don't want to put it out in the world if you're not okay with it. And he read it and he sent me literally a PDF with stickies so he annotated like every paragraph with his version of what he thought happened. And it was like Rashi. It was like, like it's very Jewish. So you have to have all the commentaries and the annotations. And so this is what he did. He annotated my whole manuscript with I thought that you felt this way. And I didn't understand that at the time. And it was almost like we were unraveling this whole, I think because we were closeted gay people who were, adolescents, we were hiding things from each other. And even though we were close to each other, and I think there was like we were living double lives to each other. And I think that this book like did something profound. And we definitely healed a lot in our relationship. That was unbelievably intense and beautiful and unexpected. It was not what I never anticipated something like that to happen. And there have been other things like that. Sometimes the opposite. People, fracturing relationships, but I won't get into it because I'll get in trouble.
Completely understood. I'm curious about who inspires you. Well, actually, no, hold on. Let's go back for a second. I really wonder what that process was like, because did you send a manuscript to everyone? Did everyone kind of get to read how they were portrayed in the book? Was it just a couple people you sent it to? And was that kind of a process of full circle apology, kind of like teshuvah? Being able to ask the question of this was my experience and receive an answer from someone who was there, like what that was like.
Well, it was very variable. Like, first of all, I had the legal read on this. My first editor for this book edited that book. What was it called? A Million Little Pieces, the book where the guy lied and he said all this happened, but it didn't happen. And so they marketed it as a memoir, but it was false. So HarperCollins they cracked down on this. So we had to do a very strict legal read. And I had to have a bunch of people reading the text and corroborating what happened to me, my colleagues from Juilliard and people from my childhood and people who knew my family, so they could corroborate it. And so that was a big part. That went on for months and months. 5 months after the book was done. So that was a big part of it. It wasn't, I feel like I didn't show it to my mother. I didn't really tell my mother. I mean, my mother knew early on that I got this book deal, and her only words were, uh-oh. That was like 10 years before. I mean, it took me 10 years to write the book. So that was 10 years ago. She just knew, knowing me, what I'm going to do. And then we just never spoke about it again. And then 48 hours before the book came out on Amazon, my cousin called me and said, "You have to call your mother. Like, you better hurry up because my mother knows about your book." Like, I just sort of hid it from them. I couldn't deal with it. I didn't want my mother I just didn't want her to read it. I just thought maybe there'll be a way that she'll never find out. I don't know. I was in a little bit of denial, and I just didn't, I just thought like, oh, I just don't want to deal with this. And I know that my mom hates to be exposed, and I just know that's like excruciating to her. And so I just didn't want to put her through any of this. But she found out like, with 2 days before the book came out. By the time I called her, I said, okay, I'm going to call her. I'm going to tell her about it. And so I called my mother, and then she had the book in her hands, and I dedicated it to her, and she was just quelling. She was like, you dedicated a book to me? And I was like, yes, it's to you, but not for you. So don't read it. You can put it on your shelf and just look at it and tell your friends my son wrote a book. And she was like, okay, honey. But I could tell, I know that's not her. She's somebody who's very, she likes to snoop around. And she would always look through my drawers and stuff, trying to know everything. So I just knew she was going to read it. But I thought, if you want to read it, I don't want to talk to you about it. Because I didn't want to contest anything. I just wanted, here's my thing. You can disagree with it and hate it. And that's fine. But I just don't want to, I don't want to have a conversation about it where you say, no, that's not true. And she basically kind of stuck to that. And I think my sister, both of my brothers didn't read it. My sister read it like 10 times. My sister really, it was like a kind of psychoanalysis for my sister, because I think I am really good at charting people's psychic evolutions. And she's a big character in the book. And I think she was going, oh my God, yeah, like that causality thing of going, this happened, which led to that. So then I did this, which led to this. Just watching that sort of chart through a book is incredibly illuminating. And she would just send me like photos of things she highlighted, and it became kind of crazy. She'd read it so many times, but I think it was almost like a therapy process for my sister. That was kind of amazing.
Something else that's really interesting is that within the book, like, you are this main character, but you don't have, I guess, as it might be referred to, main character energy. You're the protagonist, but you're also pretty brutal with yourself. And I'm wondering whether it was healing to kind of look back at some moments and have like the distance of adulthood to be able to laugh at this moment, or to feel healed from this moment, and what that process was like for you. How did you take care of yourself when you are writing about what are some really traumatizing incidents and really upsetting experiences to have at a young age?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, my salvation in general in my life is my sense of humor, because I do have an absurd sense of humor, and I have since I was a little boy. And so I just see traumatic things sometimes. I mean, I see the trauma, but I can laugh at it, and I always have been able to laugh at things. So that is very helpful to me. But when I wrote the book, I wasn't in the original, like the first draft of the book at all. Like, I wasn't a character. I was there, but I was like writing more about everybody else, because that's what I do as playwright. I write about this person and that person, and who wants to hear about me? Like, I'm not that interesting. So then my publisher was like, you can't do that. You can't have a memoir and not be in it. You have to write about how everyone's affecting you. We want to know about you. And I'm like, you do? I don't know. Like, that just seems crazy to me. So I thought, all right, well, I'm going to have to do it the way I do my plays, where I'll make myself a character. I'll give myself the character actions and things to watch, and objectives and obstacles. And I'll do it that way. And then I'll try to be, again, exact as possible. So I'm not a judgmental person. I'm really not. I can be mad at you for doing something to me, but I can also accept your humanity and your flawed humanity. And I'm like that with myself too. So I don't let my aversions cloud my ability to look at what needs to be looked at so that I can render my work. Because I'm a writer, my job is to see what's happening and then to render it in words. And so, and to make people feel the emotions that you need to be feeling in order for it to make sense. So that's how I did it. I and I didn't think I was being mean to myself or nice to myself. I just thought, this is, I have to show everything as specifically and minutely and accurately as I can. And I can't be unfair to other people and more fair to myself. That just seems crazy. Like I just have to put myself on the same plane. So I made that's a moral decision that you have to make early on. And the books that don't do it are really bad for me, because I don't need to see someone aggrandize themselves and put other people down in their books. I have read memoirs like that, and I don't like it.
So I think that's a really healthy response to people having different memories of the same event, or having to account for all the different versions of yourself that have existed. I'm wondering about the role that you feel therapy may have played in your ability to do this kind of psychoanalysis, both for your characters and for the people in your life. I was kind of surprised and happy to read about the adventures of this young man who even, decades ago was seeking what we would describe today as kind of help for mental health, being in therapy, even though there was kind of a quiz-inducing overlay for the first therapist where there was a bit of a conversion therapy element to, what he was helping you with. I'm wondering what the relationship is between therapy, soul searching, and character creation in your work.
That's a great question. Therapy. I think that I became very interested in psychoanalysis after I started to do it. When I was 15 or 16, the yeshiva that I was in trouble, because I was always in trouble. I was never doing anything right at the yeshiva. And they said, you have to go see a therapist because that must be part of your. I think they knew I was gay, and this was like a way of just go there, deal with it over there. And so, he was trying to do a kind of conversion thing. He didn't really do it. He didn't know what to do. I think in the end, he's like, I'm going to make you a functioning bisexual. And I was like, that sounds great. At the time, it sounded amazing. But he didn't really do anything. I never asked about it because I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to follow your lead. So I just left it alone. But he was great in a lot of ways. And he was he taught me, he would talk about different films like Ingmar Bergman, because I was interested in cinema, and we talk about this and that. And he was trying to sort of get me out of this world that I was kind of like glued to. I was so glued to this mundane yeshiva life, and I couldn't see a way out of it. And he was like, no, I think you could maybe get out of this and do something else, and you could do, the artwork that you want to do. And so he really motivated me. He was challenging me and he was pushing me. It was very, very good. But he was also sort of showing me how the unconscious worked and how we could have aspects of ourselves that were so remote and so hidden that would pop up in these ways that were very surprising and shocking. And I got very interested in that. And then when I went to college, I studied a lot of psychoanalysis and Freud and Lacan and all this stuff. And I was really interested in it. And I'm really interested in human psychology, which is one of the reasons I like to be a writer, because I like exploring the dimensions of people's psyches. And so I think they are connected for me. For sure. Like, I think if I couldn't be a writer, I'd probably be a therapist. And when I teach, I'm like a shrink. I feel like when I'm teaching my students, like, I feel like I'm very, very, it's like I'm a bloodhound on the trail. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like I have to pull out the thing that's underneath that we're not talking about, and I have to pull it up to the surface. And I think that's my talent. I think I have a talent for that. So I think writing and teaching and analysis are all linked by that desire, this like drive I have to get at what's hidden and bring it to light in some way, and bring some kind of coherence or healing, or you said replanting, whatever you want to call that. That's a deep drive that I have, that I've always had since I was 5 or 6.
I would also just love to conclude my questions by asking, you talk about a lot of cinematic and literary and philosophical influences in your book, but that was 3 years ago. And I'm curious about what you're reading now and what's inspiring and influencing you now, 3 years later.
Oh my God. It's so hard to read when I'm just writing so much. And so right now I'm reading books about Greek tragedy. There's a book by Terry Eagleton called Tragedy. I feel like everyone in this audience would probably be bored by it, but I love it so much. It's very interesting, and it's looking at Greek tragedy through these different lenses, historical lenses, and so psychoanalytic lenses. So I'm reading a lot of stuff about tragedy. I just finished reading a book by Daryl Pickney, which is about his relationship with Elizabeth Hardwick, the writer. I think it's called See You in September. It's such a great book. I love that. I finished for a project that I'm doing, I finished the Benjamin Moser's biography of Susan Sontag, which I loved. And what else? I don't know. I have like a backlog of things that I want. And I'm trying to do audiobooks because I feel like you get more in. Like if you can't just sit down and read, you could be walking down the street. Okay, let me try to get some literature in. But I have to get more diligent about that.
I think, if I'm remembering correctly, the book here, is it Come Back in September?
Come Back in September, yeah.
Okay, cool. Actually,
by Daryl Pickney. It's great.
You'd be surprised. A lot of the time when we have people that come and do this, anything you share, someone is probably going to look up and read. Our audience.
No, it's great. I love it. I mean, I love the writer Elizabeth Hardwick. And so if you're a fan, I love her book Sleepless Nights. If you're a fan of Elizabeth Hardwick, and Elizabeth Hardwick, Susan Sontag, they were all part of this world. And I'm sort of interested in this world of like late 1970s Upper West Side feminist intellectuals. I'm just kind of into it right now. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being part of this event today, for being in conversation with us here at My Jewish Learning. I did leave the chat open to ask if anyone has questions, but if everyone is agreeable, I'd like to conclude here and then maybe pause. But thank you, David, so much for joining us and for sharing your life and your story.
It was great. Thank you so much for having me.